Page 200. The consciousness greatness of the human being. The consciousness greatness of the human being is recognizable by his or her intellect-based actions and by his or her intellect-based speech. Therefore, when one wants to recognize a human being's consciousness greatness, one pays attention to how rationally he or she acts and speaks. Consciousness greatness is therefore recognizable when the intellect and the rationality of the human being are analyzed. And intellect as well as rationality are built upon a natural and incontrovertible logic, therefore upon a natural law. It is known that the human being can only form their intellect and their rationality by first committing errors, out of which they then learn. Without committing errors, no individual is in the position to gather cognitions, to form rationality and intellect, and to acquire a consciousness-based greatness. Consciousness greatness does not consist therein that the human being possesses much book knowledge and professional knowledge and the like, or simply from acquiring a good general education. This kind of knowledge means only an intellectual knowledge, which is of some significance professionally and socially. It is therefore a pattern knowledge, which is thereto only useful to be able to hold one's own professionally and socially. But this knowledge is only of significance for the consciousness greatness insofar as it can be useful as a lesson. But unfortunately, it is so, however, that intellectual human beings, or those regarding themselves as such, do not know what to do with this teaching material and quite simply atrophy in a consciousness-based manner. However, human beings who are great in a consciousness-based manner have recognized that intellectual knowledge can really only be valued professionally and socially, whereas effective consciousness-based knowledge, however, elevates the life potential and allows the human being to live rightly in a creational manner. Consciousness greatness means recognition and acknowledgement of the creational laws and secrets, their abidance and evaluation. This recognition, however, remains reserved only for a conscious and consciousness-based thinking human being. A human being who is small in a consciousness-based manner, however, is in no wise able to initiate anything with this recognition. That this is really so, one recognizes from the following preface. The human being must commit errors, thus he or she can learn from them, and he or she never again commits the same errors. As a rule, the fallible one is also willing to draw a lesson from the error made, and to never again commit the same error. However, now along comes the dear neighbor, or someone else, and reproaches the human being in question for the committed error, although his or her error has already been acknowledged as a lesson. As a result, the lesson becomes inconstant again, or destroyed, because when something good is rebuked, then it is unable to further trigger any positive reaction in the human being, because inevitably doubts arise. A recognized and eliminated error must therefore be acknowledged and may never be, quote, rehashed again and appear as a, quote, reminder, remonstrance, or reproach, like the, quote, threshing of the old straw. But if this is done anyway, then it corresponds to an irresponsible irrationality and, likewise, an unintellect, which is only to be found in consciousness-based smallness and consciousness-based unknowledge. How irrational and dumb in consciousness the various authorities in general behave in this regard can be recognized by their work methods, especially by the police and the courts. If a human being is delinquent once, thus this is grounds enough to reproach and judge him or her accordingly with this offense, again and again, for every little thing for their whole life. Therefore, what once was cannot be forgotten, through which the human being is forced into an aggressive attitude. From this results that various laws, seen purely psychologically, are devoid of any logic and were quite obviously drawn up and implemented by rather dumb human beings. However, every human being can form his or her own opinion about human beings who follow and represent such dumb laws and regulations. The fact is that the behavior of the quote, threshing of old straw not only bears witness to the dumbness of the particular human being to the highest degree, but seen purely psychologically, it represents an absolute idiocy and drives the human being into opposition and aggressiveness, and furthers the volition against drawing a lesson from an error. If legislations and their executors, or executors, were rational and comprehending enough to recognize this fact and to act accordingly, then the world would have to suffer less from relapsing criminals. However, through the dumb behavior of legislators, the logic and the consciousness wisdom no longer come into play, and a misstepping human being is compelled into the criminality. In this regard, the only right way to bring this about is via the consciousness rationality and the consciousness intellect, thus via the consciousness wisdom. The logical result of this would be that a one-time misstepping human being be instructed of his or her error, and if necessary be punished, and that then, however, everything should be forgotten and never be brought to light again, not even if another new error is committed. However, that errors become, quote, threshed like old straw again and again, and are even reflected in registries, surpasses the pinnacle of a primitive dumbness. But it also bears witness to it that the human being, until now, despite all his or her drivel about freedom, in no wise lives in freedom, but is the slave to human and false to nature laws. A human being is only then able to achieve consciousness greatness when he or she strives for the sense of the life, but never when he or she thinks and acts egocentrically in his or her selfishness, and stubbornly lives by false clauses and false regulations. Such a human being is not able to be a human being, but only a stereotype without sense and purpose and fulfillment. But when the human being recognizes the sense of the life, then he or she also recognizes the laws of the creation and follows them. However, to follow them means to empfinden true, honest, and creational love, and to show oneself as a human being, and to give love. However, love is not a term, but a recognition and a feeling resulting from it, a feeling which is offered to every human being who is worthy of it. But love is also a tremendous might, which makes the life viable, exactly as hate is able to kill. The greater the consciousness of the human being is, in the knowledge and in the wisdom, the greater his or her creational love will be towards everything and everybody, a love which one must designate as universal love, for want of another term. But in reality, it is the primal Gewalt of the creation which first makes the life possible. The creation itself clothes itself in a word of age-old terminology, Om, spelled O-M. Om is the basic foundation of the life, of the might, of the being. And in Om, the human being fulfills his or her mission, which has not only purely cosmic, rather all-universal significance. By following this cognition, the normal thinking human being cannot possibly do otherwise than to adjust his or her consciousness and his or her spirit in this direction, and to follow the creational laws. But if he or she does not do this, if he or she refuses or ridicules this truth of the wisdom, then he or she lives only a semblance of the life as a human being, while within, he or she is hollow and empty and unknowing. The result of this is that the human being, without the creation and without its universal love, indeed, is an individual created by it, who, however, in his or her foolishness, puts himself or herself in the center of the universe and thereby renders insufficient and false, contrary to nature laws, which are neither permanent nor viable in the long run. The creational laws of the nature, however, have everlasting permanence and also do not allow themselves to be changed by the human beings. That this is so is proven by the fact that laws, drawn up by human beings, need a constant renewal and must be continuously adjusted to the current times. Only a dumb human being can still claim that human laws are logical and good for all times. The creational natural laws, on the other hand, are the ultimate perfection of the creation down to the smallest detail. And would the human being follow them, then the nature would be serving him or her, and it would be sheer peace on earth. But since the human being does not act so, consequently, misery, hardship, and war, criminality and hate, and discord rule. Great in consciousness is the human being who recognizes and acknowledges the laws of the creation. So he or she therefore lives according to them, and correspondingly places his or her life parallel to his or her mission. Hence again it follows that the universal love must also be recognized and fulfilled for the neighbor, as long as this neighbor is worthy of it. Since this is the case, it must occur under all circumstances, even if hardship arises from it. This love is called love for the next one, and is an obligation of the creation in the creation. This love also requires that the next one be helped over all hardship, insofar as love and help are appropriate. The greater the consciousness becomes, which means the more knowing and wiser, the greater and more intensive becomes the recognition and the feeling of the all-embracing love. It follows that the human being becomes happy when he or she can give their honest love to someone, or when he or she may give help to someone. Any equivalent values of any kind are thereby not asked for, and also not hoped for, because the feeling of the love to be given away is truly reward enough. Here's a quote. Only he or she is a human being, in truth and wisdom, who is able to give away genuine love as love without reward. That's Billy in September of 1973. And then there's a glossary of German words, and that's the book.